Hello and welcome to this month's mini lecture. This lecture is going to be on the topic of refugees and migrants. So all the information that I speak about in this presentation can be found in our learning pack, which is on the Human Rights Pulse website under the Youth Education Projects tab. So first, let's quickly run through the lesson objectives. So these are the objectives that the lesson plan sets out for students to learn during the course of the lesson. So the first one is to learn about the international legal frameworks regarding refugees and migrants. So we're going to look at some frameworks created by the United Nations, as well as some other organisations. We're also going to learn about serious cases of mass displacement. In this lesson, our case study is on the Rohingya community in Myanmar. So we're going to delve into that situation and have a deeper look at what's going on and understand how that relates to the wider refugee population. Thirdly, we're going to understand the growing number of refugees and migrants worldwide. So we're going to look at some reasons why the refugee population is growing. We're also going to look at where the refugee population is principally situated and why that might be. We're also going to look at how refugees and migrants might face certain hostility and discrimination throughout their experience with displacement. And finally, we're going to learn about how the safety and dignity of refugees and migrants can be better protected. Okay, so let's get started. So first of all, we're going to have a look at some of those frameworks I mentioned earlier. So this is international laws which relate to migrants and refugees. So the first one that we have here is the 1951 Convention. So this was a treaty from the United Nations which related to the status of refugees. This convention actually established the term refugee as the definitions here: someone who, due to the events which occurred in Europe before January 1951, is outside of their country of nationality and incapable of returning due to the fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Now, clearly that doesn't seem to quite relate to the definition of a refugee that we see now. What we now understand to be a refugee is more reflected in the 1967 protocol, which we're going to look at, which adjusted the definition of refugees to eliminate that limitation in there on time and place. So obviously that definition, which now no longer refers to any specific time or place, is more similar to the commonly understood definition that we know today. Finally, because we do have some facts on migrants, we're also going to quickly look at the definition of migrants, which is someone who's generally referred to as someone who chooses to move not because of a direct threat to life or freedom, but in order to find work, for education, family reunion, or other personal reasons. So you can see that there is quite a stark difference between a refugee and a migrant. Obviously, the refugees are moving not because of their own personal desire, but because of some wish to escape danger of some type or persecution. Whereas a migrant, there's more personal choice within that decision to move. So next up, we have, we're going to speak about some international legal protections for refugees and migrants. So the first one we have is non-refoulement, which is one of the most important principles that was established in that previous convention we spoke about. This principle establishes the right of all refugees to not be forced to return to their country of origin. So this obviously protects them from whatever persecution or war they were facing in their country of origin. So some protections include the right of association, free access to courts, access to housing and education, the right to work, and entitlement to the same labour rights as the nationals in their country of residence are entitled to. So this protects their status and their human rights within the country which they have travelled to, and brings their rights in some areas to an equal level of the residents of those countries. And finally, although there is no international legal instrument dealing specifically with migrants, institutions such as the International Organization on Migration preserve and seek to enhance the obligation of states. So these institutions help protect and, further advance the rights of migrants in their new countries. So next we're going to have a quick look at some statistics regarding refugees. So in total, there's about 82.4 million displaced people worldwide. So 26.4 million are refugees. The rest of them are asylum seekers or other types of displaced people. So obviously quite a large portion of those displaced people are refugees. 42% are children, which is quite a shocking statistic. 68% originate from just 5 countries. So we can see these 5 countries here. We've got Syria, which is by far has the largest population of refugees. Next, we have Afghanistan. Third, we have South Sudan. Fourth, we have Myanmar. And finally, we have Venezuela. It's important to note that the statistics from this learning pack was created in 2019. We've used those same statistics in this mini lecture, but it is worth noting that these figures may differ slightly, especially given regard to the recent conflicts in Afghanistan. So it's worth noting that these figures may differ slightly. 73% of the number of refugees are hosted in neighbouring countries. So that means that if a conflict or persecution is happening in one country, then the refugees from that country tend to be hosted in the country which is immediately next door to that country, which dispels a typical rumour that the majority of refugees are, travelling long distances to travel to specific countries. In reality, the majority, 73%, are hosted in the countries directly next door to their original country. And the final fact is that refugees face hostility and discrimination in their host countries. So that's actually a case study that we're about to look at, which is the Rohingya. So the Rohingya are a minority Muslim population who live mainly in the Rakhine state of Myanmar. So Myanmar was the country that was formerly known as Burma. So in Myanmar, there is no access to citizenship, and they have only limited access to education and health. So like previously when we spoke about the rights of refugees, if I just go back to that slide. No, next one. So in the second paragraph, we see how some states provide protection, which brings the rights of refugees up to the same or similar standard of their host, of the people who have residency in the host country. This isn't the case in Myanmar, and the refugees have no access or very limited access to these types of protections. Not only that, the Rohingya also face violence and conflict in their new host country, the host country that they went to seek protection. Myanmar's soldiers carry out several physical attacks, such as massacres, killings, and sexual violence. These soldiers also burn down houses and destroy entire villages. So currently there's about 900,000 Rohingya living in the refugee camp at Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. This is actually the largest refugee camp in the entire world. So this is an example of where refugees have faced conflict on a large scale. So our next slide is just looking at a quick timeline, a very brief timeline of this conflict. So it began in 1962 with the military dictatorship, which repressed political opinion and liberty of expression in that country. In 2015, there were democratic elections, the first openly contested democratic elections in the country. And the military government, the NLP, NLD party actually won those elections. So in 2016, almost immediately after the election, we see a growth in the abuse against the Rohingya. So actions from the insurgent Rohingya group and the military provoked this spike in violence and the growth in the abuse against this Rohingya group. And in 2020, there was an ongoing growth in that refugee population. So over the last couple of years, we see around 900,000 refugees in that Bangladeshi camp, and still growing. And then finally in 2021, there was a new military coup in the country, and that created an even more uncertain situation for the Rohingya group. So the final thing we're going to look at is a extract from Home by Warsan Shire. So this is an extract that speaks more about the experience of refugees, specifically speaking about what I mentioned earlier, where a common idea is that refugees will travel long distances almost for the sake of it. So let's read this. You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one burns their palms under trains beneath carriages. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck feeding on newspaper unless the miles travelled means something more than the journey. And I think that rings true, that a lot of people forget about the dangerous journeys that refugees embark on in order to find safety and to flee the persecution and the conflict they're facing. Okay, so that is all for today on this topic of refugees and migrants. There is further information in the learning pack, so feel free to visit that webpage linked on this slide, where you can find all of our learning packs. These include lesson exercises that can be done in lessons, which cater for a large set of abilities, and can be done in groups or individually. Please do follow us on our social media, and if you have any questions or ideas, please don't hesitate to reach out either via social media or on that email link. I hope you've enjoyed today's mini lecture, and I'll look forward to seeing you next month.